and welcome to Author Nation, your go-to place for everything you need to be a nonfiction author. I am Melody Owen, your host, and we do this live show every single Thursday. So now is a great time to subscribe so you never miss a show. Today, I am interviewing Natalie Vecchione. I love that name. And she is a FASD parent advocate. If you don't know what that is, we will be explaining it soon. She's a podcaster and an author. And most importantly, she's a wife and a homeschool mom of two. Natalie and her husband, John, built their family through domestic adoption. Their son, who is 19, lives with FASD, which is Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. He has graduated from homeschool and an aspiring carpentry apprentice. Their typically developing daughter is 6. Natalie turned her family's unique challenges and journey with FASD from career reinventing into a calling when she and her husband began FASD Hope in October 2020. So she also has a podcast series, and that will give you the lens of the parent advocates over 19 years of lived experience. And we are here today to talk about her book, Blazing New Homeschool Trails. Let's welcome Natalie. Hi, Natalie. How are you?
Melody, I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so pleased you're here. If you are watching live, don't forget you can always drop us some comments and questions, and we are happy to answer them. Natalie, let's just start a little bit about your decision to adopt.
Sure. Well, actually, my husband and I met in college many years ago, and I knew that I had endometriosis, and it was confirmed when I was in college. I had my first surgery just a few months before my husband and I started dating. And I told him when we began dating what the doctor told me. The surgeon told me after my first surgery, she said, I am so sorry you've been suffering for so many years. There's a really good chance you're not going to be able to get pregnant. And I told that to my husband, and I knew he was meant to be my husband because he said, well, I don't love you because you can get pregnant. I love you because you're you. And if we can't get pregnant when we get married, we'll adopt. And I was just like, that's it. That's my man. So we married shortly after undergraduate school. And in graduate school, when we were married, we were trying to conceive and just was unsuccessful, and I was getting sicker and sicker. So we stopped, trying and all of our fertility treatments and whatnot in 1998. And I had to have a total abdominal hysterectomy in 1999 when I was 28 years old.
Wow.
Something I really, wouldn't recommend for everybody or even most people. But for me, it really was a quality of life with my body because I just was so sick. And slowly my body began to heal. A hysterectomy is not a cure for endometriosis, but it does put it in remission. So fast forward a few years after that, we started the paperwork for adopting, and we were on a waiting list. And then September 11th happened, and then a lot of birth moms did not change their birth plans, which is celebrated because we really do want birth moms to be ultimately with their birth child. So our agency said, well, it would be wise to try to go on to waiting lists of other agencies as well. And they usually don't do that, but back then, of course, everything changed after September 11th. So we were on a waiting list for a second agency, and we weren't expecting anything because we had been in this wait mode for well over a year, and a few weeks later, we get the phone call that there was a baby that had been born, and the birth mom had chosen my husband and I. And of course, I'm crying hysterically, just a big blubber of mess. And the social worker said, okay, let me give you the information. And we knew he was considered to be a medical needs adoption because he had an emergency C-section and he had medical issues, which we later found out were related to him having an FASD. So when we finally got the diagnosis many years later, it connected all of the dots of all of his medical issues, cognitive, social, and whatnot. But the first thing the social worker told us was he he's a boy. And I was like, yay. Because in my mind, I always had this dream that we would have a boy and a girl, which we did. And she told us his birthday, and our son has the same birthday as my husband. So we just knew that was meant to be. We knew that was God saying, here's your baby. So we picked him up. And of course we were, just these new, exciting, way young back then, because he's 19 now, parents, and dealing with all these specialist visits and everything. But we were really just so excited, with that adoption, and with both of our adoptions, because our daughter's adoption is a different story, but equally amazing. And our son started developing what we call in the FASD community primary characteristics of FASD. So things like sensory issues, attachment issues, memory issues, executive functioning. As he grew older, we saw more of the primary characteristics associated with FASD. And, again, we were new parents. We didn't know anything about FASD. It wasn't even mentioned in any of the adoption training that we did. And we started seeing regression in sleep and sensory issues. So he went to, our son had a sleep clinic diagnosis. He had an appointment, and we went through that. And sleep study with a toddler is an oxymoron, because nobody sleeps and you don't really learn much. So we, at the follow-up appointment, our son was about 2 years old. And at the follow-up appointment, the neurologist, who we typically didn't, it was a different hospital than the one we usually went to. The neurologist told my husband and I that he just came to the room. He had a bunch of med students with him. And our son was sitting facing the group, and he was on my lap. And the neurologist came in, and he very just flippantly, just nonchalantly said, "Look at that child. He has been exposed to alcohol. He has fetal alcohol effects, and let me tell you why." And he rattled off this list of about 10 different characteristics. My husband and I were astonished. It was the first time we had heard about that. So and again, and I talk about this in our book. The neurologist didn't even acknowledge us. He just was talking to the crew of med students. And finally, when he stopped talking, my husband and I said, "This is the first time we're hearing this. What do we do?" And he just, again, very nonchalantly said, "Oh, just put him in early intervention and he'll be fine," which we later have learned. And we know now that any type of developmental disability, which FASD is the leading cause of developmental disability in the world. Many people don't know that, but it is. When you're talking about a developmental disability, it's not something you outgrow. Being a parent of a chronologically, young adult that has an FASD, there are characteristics that can improve with the proper interventions, supports, and accommodations. But you can't just say, "Oh, put them in early intervention, they'll be fine." No, it's a constant, it's a lifelong, diagnosis. So it requires lifelong interventions, supports, and accommodations. Yeah. So fast forward many years later, we finally learned our son's diagnosis. And then while that's happening, we began homeschooling. And all while that's happening, we adopted our daughter, who had a very different adoption story. And we have a 13-year age gap between our son and our daughter, as you shared. So it's been a pretty wild ride. And our journey, really, and I guess this is tied into the book and our podcast, my husband and I learned a lot along the way. And we really learned how isolating this journey is, not only as a parent of a child with an FASD, a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but with any type of neurodiversity or developmental disability or brain-based diagnosis. It's very isolating. People don't bring you casseroles and don't say, "How can I sign up to help you?" No, it's like you're on your own. You get the diagnosis, and then you're on your own to find the treatment and the interventions.
Yes.
So the reason
If you get the diagnosis.
if you
If you get the diagnosis. I'm just going to throw that in there. If you get a diagnosis.
I shared that in our book. It took us
Yeah.
13 years to finally get the proper diagnosis for our son.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also, as someone who has endometriosis, it took me 5 years to finally get a surgeon to give me a diagnosis. So it is so, my husband and I invented this word. It's defleeting. So it's deflating and defeating that nobody validates what you're going through, and you know it's real, and you know you're going through it. So that was one of the many reasons my husband and I started FASD Hope, which we have a resource website, and we have a podcast, and then that I co-authored the book Blazing New Homeschool Trails with my friend and fellow mom who's a homeschooler, and she is the mom of 5 young adults, 3 of whom have an FASD. We became friends. She's in Colorado. I'm in North Carolina. We've never even met in person, but we just collaborated. We knew that sharing our stories would hopefully help other families with their journeys, whether they have, you know, children or teens with neurodiversity or developmental disabilities, whether they homeschool or not. Our book is still applicable. And really just our main, I think one of our main takeaways we hope from our book is that if your child, teen, young adult is on this journey that does not look like college or traditional academia is going to be in their future, we share our stories and we share our journeys to say, it's not a less than experience. It's just a different experience. And it actually can be quite beautiful and quite joyful if you change your lens from, oh, what our child, you know, is not able to accomplish, to, hey, these are the gifts that are inside our kids. And the responsibility is on us to help them find that and to celebrate that.
Yeah. So, pardon me. At some point, you realized that your child had an FASD, which we used to call fetal alcohol syndrome, but it's called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because it's a multiple diagnosis thing, right? There's a number of diagnoses within that. Plus, it's a spectrum. It's not everyone looks like this. There's a like a line, right? And you could fall in anywhere in this line. And so that's why they've changed the diagnosis, just to give viewers just a little bit of a, you know, what is this? And it basically is the mother has had alcohol at some point along the journey.
Anytime, in any amount. It does not matter.
Yeah, and when they have that alcohol, depending on when it happens in the pregnancy, different developmental things are happening in the womb, and therefore it may affect a child differently. And you just said something really important. I just want to say this. Most women don't know they're pregnant for the first, 6 weeks.
Yep.
And so how easy is it to not know you're pregnant and have a few glasses of wine with dinner, and for that to happen at a critical point in development and affect the baby? I just want to say, this is not, you know, bad women are drinking and ruining their baby.
We did not. There's no shame. There's no stigma. It can happen to anyone. And the statistics, you know, here in the US, I know Canada has very similar stats. If we look at the statistics of how prevalent FASD is, so first of all, it's estimated, and this is a conservative estimate, that approximately 5%, 2 to 5% of the population has an FASD. And it doesn't matter what demographic. In 2018, a Journal of the American Medical Association study published a study from Dr. Philip May of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where he looked at, I believe it was first graders, over quite a few different communities, and assessed them. And it is estimated from that study, and again, this is conservative, that 1 in 20 children have an FASD. And that's
Yeah.
whether they are at home, whether, they're in foster care. There are some populations where it's more prevalent. However, it is an everyone problem.
Yeah.
It is, and I don't want to say problem, it's an everyone crisis, really, a healthcare crisis. The other thing that you have shared very eloquently is that FASD can happen at any time during the pregnancy, and any amount of alcohol. No amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. And if we look at statistics of just, having babies in general, here in the States, 51% of pregnancies are unplanned, whether they be, couples, married couples, unmarried. 51% of pregnancies are unplanned. And out of that, how many, birth mothers drink, whether, they just have a casual drink or social drink or anything like that. There should be no shame or stigma with this diagnosis. It can happen with anybody. And FASD is the most undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and underdiagnosed of all of the developmental disabilities. And I'm so thankful you're having me on today, Melody, because September is FASD Awareness Month. And I'm just so thankful that I'm able to share that. And that's one of the many reasons why Cindy and I wrote our book, is because we wanted not only to share our stories and give tips, but also to educate people about FASD and just how common it is. So we really had, a few missions when we wrote this book. But yes, and there are, quite, FASD is a spectrum diagnosis. It really depends on when alcohol was consumed, how much, other factors that go into the pregnancy, and really it looks different for everybody. And people often think, oh, the facial characteristics is what you're looking for. Those really are only present in about 10 to 20% of children, of individuals that have an FASD. So it is really an invisible disability. You just exactly, again, there's so many parallels between my son and I. Just like with endometriosis, there were no outward symptoms that I was like suffering through this, through endometriosis. There were really no outward symptoms that our son, that they said, but that neurologist just knew from our son's history and he knew how to connect the dots. What we wish he had done was tell us and gave us a diagnosis. He gave us a diagnosis, but it was of sensory processing disorder, which is one of the many alphabet soup acronym diagnoses that our kids often get. And then it's accurate, but it's not the complete diagnosis, which is having a diagnosis under the FASD umbrella.
No, I think that's really important, because I think a lot of women drink in the first however weeks until they know they're pregnant. And, and even, and here's something else. Even if and you are, alcohol is something you use to get by, you're addicted, I still think there's no shame in being human. And if you're using alcohol to get by, there's probably some trauma there, right? So, I think removing the shame is incredibly important, not just for women who didn't know, but for women who are doing their best, living a life after, could be trauma in childhood that puts them where they are today, right? So I'm really glad you say no shame. I'm a big no shame person. I don't, shame has no place.
No,
really,
and stigma should not, there should be no place for either of those, especially when we talk about individuals that have any type of diagnosis. It's not a matter of somebody won't do something. It's somebody is not able to do something. So that's where we need to come in and support, accommodate, and provide interventions.
I love that part of the book. We're going to get to the book in a minute. So you had this child at 13, you realize, okay, wait a minute, I finally understand what's going on. He was in regular school at one point, and there was this moment where it's like, okay, we got to walk out of here and we're never coming back, and I'm homeschooling. So as you say in the book, you were a desperation homeschooler. This wasn't the plan. And then you have this beautiful, it's in the book, I won't tell the whole story. This is a beautiful story about, how you went from pulling him out of school to creating this desperation homeschool to turning it into something that was far more delightful and beautiful and dedicated. And so we won't go into the whole story. You read the book if you want to get that part of the story. But so let's jump to so you and Cindy living on other sides of the country, you met through this desperate need to have support, and then somehow you decided to write a book. So tell us a little bit about that moment where you and Cindy decided, like, we are writing a book.
Sure.
Right. Tell us that.
So Cindy is awesome. She runs an over 12,000 member group on Facebook called Blue Collar Homeschool, which is for any family, any parents, any kids that are just homeschooling, but just not choosing, or maybe they're not, able to attend college or university after they're done with homeschool. So their path after homeschool looks different, and we celebrate that. So, she started Blue Collar Homeschool quite a few years ago. It's wonderful. So when we realized that our son wanted to be a woodworker and work with his hands and do all sorts of things, we, quite a few years ago, we joined Blue Collar Homeschool. And then when I started, I was actually volunteering with another nonprofit, another FASD nonprofit, and did another podcast. And I had interviewed her and we talked, and I reached out to her and we talked. And then when my husband and I started FASD Hope about a year ago, I reached out to her again. I said, can I have you back on? Because her story is so amazing. What they did was they turned their last year of homeschool into creating a restaurant. And it's it's in the book. I'm not going to share it, but shout out to Buckaroo Slices and Scoops in Montrose, Colorado. So Cindy and I had her on the show and we got talking. And Melody, when you connect with someone that just understands your journey, it's like, okay, we need to make this further. It's obvious that we were meant to do something together besides this, interviewing on my podcast. So I said, what would you think if we wrote a book about our stories and then share with people how it's even better than okay. You should celebrate if you're on this different road after homeschool, high school, anything. And she told me, she was like, Natalie, a lot of people have said you should write a book, and I'd like to write a book with you. She said, I'm going to write it with you because I just feel like this is the book that needs to come out. And from the time, so that was in December of 2020, and the book was released June 3rd, 2021. It really was just like boom, 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 boom. If we had such a wonderful rhythm in the writing process, the editing process. It's a self-published book. We did it all our own, and getting a great small book launch team was great. They were like eyes and, just helping us. And we're really, really proud of it because we wanted it to be a guidebook, and that was kind of like our mission when we first started talking in December. We want this to be like a handbook for any parent who just is not sure what, their child will do when they're done with school or homeschool. So it's only 108 pages. It's not that bad of a read. And we also want it to be a resource that you can go back to, so like if something kind of struck you, like, oh yeah, I remember reading that in Blazing New Homeschool Trails. So we had that. And then the other cool thing, which we really weren't expecting, but this developed, was we started not only did we launch the book, but we started a website around the book. And we, are building our mailing list, and probably sometime, I'm hoping in the late fall or early winter, we're going to start offering courses and just meeting with people who read the book and say, build this community. So we're really excited. We think that we thought the book was just kind of like the end, but it's actually the beginning. Which, if you're writing a book, if you're listening to us and writing a book, your book is like, can be just launch something amazing, especially if you have this niche that nobody knows about, or that you really find there's a need to fill. Your book really can be such a resource for people. So if you're on the edge about writing a book, or if you're not sure, if you're beginning, honestly, it probably won't happen as fast as Cindy and I, because we're just kind of like really type A, get it done kind of thing. But um, but really, I mean, see your book as the resource it can be for your audience. And it's been such a blessing to hear from, these wonderful, mostly moms, but dads too, who have said, wow, thank you for writing this. I really needed to read this and to hear your journeys.
Yeah. I love that it's been a launching pad for so much more. Is something I always tell authors when they come to me for advice, when I'm working with authors. It's like, look, you can put a book out there, but what you want it to be is a launch pad for something else, or to integrate it into something you already have, like Cindy's Facebook group. It could have been integrated into that. It could be a launch pad for something else. So very, very well done. And one thing I liked about it, because I'm thinking about, harried homeschool parents, right, who don't have a lot of time. It's not, as you said, it's not a tomb, right? It's not.
You can stick it in your purse and read it in between appointments. You can leave it in the
it's
car. It's really,
it's a fast read. So I think part of the promise, I always ask what the promise, I think part of the promise is it won't take you a year to read. It'll just be a fast read. And so if I'm in the bookstore and I'm looking at this, the front, and I'm reading the description in the back, and I'm flipping through, we buy books on a promise. We buy books because we believe that there's a promise made by the author. What would you say the promise is of this book to the reader?
So we have multiple promises. I can't limit it to just one.
Sure.
So I'll give you like maybe the top three.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, a different path after school or homeschool or after education is over, a different path that does not involve academia or a traditional launch should be celebrated. And we are celebrating ours, and we share that in our journeys. So we really value that our book is an out-of-the-box way to look at our kids' future. That's promise number one.
Love it.
Promise number two is that there are many ways our kids can learn, especially our kids that have either neurodiversity or just school's not for them, or they have an FASD like our kids. There are so many ways we can learn. People think learning book or online and that's it. Cindy and I talk about going out into places, and of course pre-COVID, going out into stores, or Cindy shared about taking her kids to a bank and asking them to go behind the scenes of how a bank works. Or, I share an experience with our son and his carpentry apprenticeship teacher about how he would just go in the field and just be able to do these things that he would not do, sitting in a classroom. And disclaimer, we're not bashing traditional academia. We're not bashing traditional schools. We're not bashing college or university. If that's what's meant for your kids, go for it. We're not bashing that at all. We don't want you to think that. We just want families to know that if that's not in the future, it's not a less than. It actually is a really cool thing. So that's promise number two. Promise number three. We picked specifically our cover. We had this vision in mind. This was one of the things. The hardest thing was to come up with a title. And I don't know if this is showing backwards, so I apologize, but we wanted to show a road sign in the middle of nowhere, because I think that's how we feel on this journey. We're in the middle of nowhere. There's paths, and where the heck do we go? We want this book and our journeys to be that road sign that says skilled trades, entrepreneurship this way, apprenticeship, self-employment this way, which are the journeys that our kids took. Mine took skilled trades and self-employment. Her kids took entrepreneurship and I'm trying to think of the other one and self-employment. So we really want the final promise of the top three promises. We want you to know that you're not alone on this journey. We went through it. We're still going through it. It doesn't end, but we share our stories, which read like fiction, I mean, our stories, I think, are kind of like, ooh, that's interesting, and then we share our insights, and we most importantly want you to know that you're not alone, and we know what it's like to be lonely on this journey. So I think those would be the top 3 promises, I hope.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love it. It's one of the best "what is your promise" answers I've ever had. That's a brilliant answer. So one thing I'm just going to say, one thing I liked about it was the first few chapters, the first 4 chapters are really your stories. And I always think that there's so much value in reading other people's stories. And then and as I was reading it, I have a child who is neurodiverse, and as reading it, it was, I could relate to it. There was stuff, it was like, and right.
Yeah.
Like good reminders and good ways to, really excellent ways to frame things. And I really enjoyed it. And then the second half was kind of the more of the how-to, right? This is, the practical, this is how you can do it. And in that section, honestly, there's that, it was the 5th or the 6th chapter on how to educate, on how learners learn and how to teach. I think every teacher should read that and adopt some of these, and I'm talking about regular school as well. Just, it's there. We have this one way of teaching in schools. We have this very limited one way of teaching. And chapter 5, tips and tools for homeschooling teens with developmental disabilities, listed some very practical and excellent ways of teaching that I think anyone who educates children and teens could get a lot from. That was my thought. So
thank you.
And I love stories that come from people's experience. This how-to, this is like, look, I've been down in the trenches. I've been down there, right? And this is what I know. And yet it's a really thin book. So how did you figure out what you're going to put in and what you were going to leave out? Because you could have written 3 books.
Yeah, it could have been a much more.
So how did you figure this out?
So we honestly, it was our experience that told us this book needed to be short, because we both didn't have time to read these long books. And the books that helped us the best were the books that just got to the point and said, here's how it is, that kind of thing. So really, it was a matter of necessity. The book had to be short. And the book originally was longer, not much, but it was a little longer. And then we were just like, let's just cut to the chase. What do we need to share? Like our family's adoption journey and Cindy's family's adoption journey, we could have gone into like the extended version of everything, kind of like what I shared with you, but we didn't, because we knew that we wanted to talk about the very specific part about what led us to homeschooling. So I really think that for those reasons, we knew we needed to keep the book short. Now, will we write a second book? We're already talking about that, because people are like, hey, what about this? And what about this? So Cindy and I are going to be collaborating for a while.
Awesome.
I'm so thankful. Not only am I blessed to be her friend, but I'm so thankful that she agreed, and that we wrote this book together, and we're doing the website and what comes after together. And we're even talking about the future, because we both have a lot of commonalities in our journeys and in our family's journeys. And we both have learned so much. And we know, both Cindy and I can say this, we both interviewed on another podcast last night, and she said exactly this. If we can help, parents who are, have similar situations, but they're about 10 years, behind us. If we can we're on the same road, we're just about 10 years ahead of you. And we can say, hey, there's a roadblock here, or hey, there's a bump over here, or hey, there's there's roadkill on the road over here. You might want to walk around it. If we can say that to other parents, to us, that was the best advice we received, was advice from other parents. So that's one of our many missions. If we can do that in this book for other families, or even, I really hope that, teachers, anyone in any type of educational setting would read our book, because we really do share insights of, hey, my son had trouble with his times tables, but when he was on the trampoline, he aced them because he had that sensory input. Or, like Cindy talks about, teach, touch, that just those types of techniques, they really do work.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you both have individually memoirs that you could write as well, like
Thank
full
you.
memoirs on the journey as well. So do you have a small excerpt you could read
Sure.
to us, or you'd like to read to us? I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Thank you. So, excuse me, this is from my chapter of our homeschool trade school, as I like to call it, our homeschool
Mm-hmm.
trade school journey. And we're talking about my son. Besides working in an amazing workshop with an incredible teacher, our son was learning about subjects like math, physics, machinery, science, and business skills through his apprenticeship with his teacher. His teacher would challenge our son to cut and measure with increasing precision. Our son learned how to use old school methods for his lathe work, staining, and sealing projects. The beauty of a one-to-one apprenticeship allows the teacher to share the tips of the trade and old school methods with his or her student. An apprenticeship is not just learning about his or her trade, but it's also about developing his or her own style in the craft or trade. Apprenticeships also allow the student to learn through out of the box experiences. Recently, our son's teacher invited our son to go with him to pick up a fallen black walnut tree that was gifted to our son's teacher. The experience of going on a drive, learning about how to move a very large fallen tree, and the process of getting it to where it would be dried was an amazing learning opportunity for our son. After a year, that black walnut tree would be turned into lumber for future projects for them. Our son shared that he learned so much and he truly enjoyed what he learned that Saturday with his apprenticeship teacher. Even though our son officially completed his homeschool last year, he continues to be with his teacher to apprentice because, and this is italicized, learning doesn't stop when the homeschool journey is finished. Our son's teacher has shared with us that our son can continue to be his apprentice for as long as he's able to do so. We are family that our son's teacher and his family have blessed our son in countless ways. Perhaps the biggest blessing in our son's apprenticeship is our son's teacher, genuine hope for our son to be happy in his delight in helping him to learn and grow in his trade and in life. In our son's teacher, our son has found a teacher, a mentor, and a good example of someone who embraces our son for who he is, the amazing young adult that is our son.
Mm.
And I use our son and teacher just for confidentiality purposes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So writing this, how did you figure out what you could say about your son and what you shouldn't?
So when
This is
I
very
interview,
personal.
yes, it is. So when I interview, when I'm interviewed, when I share experiences, our son and I, we have this agreement that we call the usual. That's what it's called. It stands for the usual, but the usual. So in the usual, we have established what I can say, what he's comfortable in me sharing, and what is off limits, what is, he doesn't want to share. And we routinely make sure that, okay, this is what mom's saying. Is that cool? Yes, that's cool. Our son has specifically said, and this is why I feel so blessed as his mom. He has said, Mom, by you sharing our story in the book or on the podcast or in interviews, if you can help another family not have to go through what we went through and waiting, he was 15 when he was finally diagnosed, and we started homeschooling when he was almost 12. If you can help a kid not have to go through what I went through, then share it and help, and so that to me is like, wow. I know, I tell him this all the time. I know you think you're not doing much in your life, but thousands of people would not be able to walk 1 inch in the boots that you walk in, because you are just teaching us you're teaching the world so much about resilience, about overcoming, and about miracles, honestly, because, a long time before that, we would have never pictured our son to be this talented, young woodworker who wants to start his own business the way he is. It's not that we didn't think he could. It's just we were in a much darker place, like say 5 years ago, than we are now. So, we even sharing, just like about his diagnosis and everything, he has made it very specific. This is okay. This is not. And in fact, today before our conversation, I was like, I'm just reviewing our use just to make sure. And he's like, that's cool. So yeah, we have an agreement. And with our daughter, I'd share a little, our daughter is like much different. Excuse me. She probably would prefer if I wrote a book about her. So that may be my next book. She's a little more like, exactly. But yeah, no, we respect that. And my husband and I, we are just so thankful that he wants to help others, in this journey by us sharing our journey.
Yeah. Your youngest daughter. Where's my book, Mom?
Yeah, exactly.
It'll come. So what advice would you give to other parents who are in your position? They've spent 20 years raising a child. They have all of this valuable information. They have processes and experiences that they want to share, and they could write a 500-page book. What is your advice to them if they're out there going, I want to write this book?
So Cindy and I really, we really just kind of, it was like we started with the vision and the mission of our book, and then just grew from there. So, and it's funny because the title was the last thing to come. We could not think of a title. We knew what our book was about, but it was the very last thing to come. Yeah. But what's like your mission? Do you want to help people? Do you want to, show people that there's another way to do something? Do you want to, have your book be a platform for a cause, for, whatever. And then just kind of think about the chapters. So of course, I know a lot of authors do this, but I did, the diagram where it's like, here's the book. Okay. Chapter 1, Cindy and I did that. And then we broke it down. I was very thankful that I could work with Cindy. We had a great working relationship. If you find there's another parent that you think, I think personally, our readers like to hear our two very different journeys. I mean, Cindy adopted her children internationally. Our children were adopted domestically. So we had two very different experiences. So if you find that, if you find someone who has the same mission and you're talking about the same topic, but you have two different perspectives, then that's a really great tool. And that would probably be number 4 of our, promise, is that you're going to see two very different perspectives of how this looks. So that I think would actually be like almost like a marketing tool, is like, if you can partner with somebody else and you can develop this great working relationship, you're going to have this book that is going to have a lot of variety and a lot of different perspectives. So, and honestly, if you have a book inside you. Honestly, yes. I knew that after we were done in this, I knew that I'm a woman of faith. I knew that God put this book in me for a reason. And Cindy knew that too. So if you know that there's a book inside you, then you should go for it. Don't hesitate. And it's not, honestly, for us, it took 6 months, but I know it's not, just give yourself time. We gave ourselves chunks of time, have like a little tribe of people that you trust, that you can say, hey, how does this look? How does that look? But just do it. I mean, there's a need, and people are so appreciative when you write about something that there's very little about. And I mean, a homeschooling book that doesn't involve, college afterwards, and we're highlighting developmental disability. that was like nowhere on Amazon search. So like, or any other search, honestly, not just, not, we published through Amazon, but in any other type of, if you Googled that, like nothing would come up, so if you Google it and nothing comes up, and if it's inside of you, then it was meant to be a book and you should go for it.
And to add to that, that means finding your niche, right? That you're right there. What you're talking about is finding your niche. You Google it, it's not up there. A niche. Yes. Absolutely. So if you're, so to get the book, go to the show notes. There will be a link in there. It's a great little book. I really enjoyed it. Now, before we go, we've had this really wonderful discussion, but I really want to talk about FASD Hope.
Thank you.
You've started a nonprofit.
It's not a nonprofit. We really consider to be like a ministry.
A ministry. Okay.
Yeah. We really consider to be like a ministry. So my husband and I was volunteering for an FASD nonprofit, but it was really localized to the state and the region that we were living in. And doing the podcast, just like, you're an author and you really have a heart for authors, I really connected with podcasting. I was like, oh yeah, this is my jam. This is what I was meant to do, and that's why I joke. First of all, thank you for having me on. This is like the first live YouTube video I've done, and you've made it so pleasant. So thank you. I connected with podcasting, and podcasting is such an underutilized medium. I mean, so I was like, okay, there's no podcast. There's like 3 other podcasts about FASD. And we want people to know that, again, just like the book, you're not alone. We've been through it, and to provide resources. So our guests are the resources. My husband and I just have lived experience. We interview all these wonderful guests that share, resources. So, I love podcasting, and I just really connected with the podcasting community. So I think that's where we met on, I believe it's on Jen Hensel's Women in Podcasting. I think that's the one we met on one of our podcasts.
Probably it's probably through Jennifer. Yeah, she's awesome. It's her birthday.
Yes, she's amazing. She actually was really helpful in giving me some great tips and when I started well over a year ago. So I love podcasting. FASD Hope, anywhere you get podcasts. You can also find us on FASDHope.com. But each week, and I say each week with air quotes because today is September 16th. We released episode 83 today. That's not every week. That's like twice a week. And we just hit 20,000 downloads, which is like, again, we're blown away. We were just hoping to go beyond the state borders of where we live. I mean, we have listeners all over the world, and the feedback we get is so kind and so, helpful. Thank you so much for sharing, your story or sharing this guest. We really just feel like this is our mission. This is what we were meant to do. So,
that's beautiful.
And it's also fun. It's fun too. I love podcasting.
Yeah, it is. It's great. It's a great way to connect with people. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. I hear you. So Natalie's podcast, FASD Hope, is on Apple Podcasts. I've also put a link in the show notes for you. I like viewers to be able to grab things quick. So there they are. Natalie, besides that, this has been great. By the way, it's Jennifer Hensel's birthday. Shout out to Jennifer Hensel.
That's right. Happy birthday, Jen.
Happy birthday, Jennifer.
That's right.
And so beyond this, where can we find you?
So on social media, on Instagram at FASD Hope, Facebook is at FASD Hope 1, Twitter at FASD Hope, and I'm on LinkedIn as Natalie Vecchione. So you can connect with me through any of those. And you can email me, Natalie at FASDHope.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciated this today. I have had so much fun talking to you. It's been a great journey, and this is such an important topic. I'm really glad that I could bring it into Author Nation, not only for the topic itself. It is awareness, FASD Awareness Month this September. So not only for that, but also for your information and your advice to help other parents who want to write a book in a similar way. So Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Melody, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and you are a phenomenal host. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll see everyone next Thursday for another YouTube Live with Author Nation.